So we start with the story of the adulterous woman, shows how Jesus once again is portrayed in the New Testament as greater than even Moses. There's the story of this woman caught in adultery. There are witnesses, and according to the law, she must be killed by stoning. Jesus does not follow the law on this point. He actually changes it. So this is important to show who Jesus is, the new Moses, the prophet greater than Moses, or the prophet to come from Deuteronomy 18, where Moses himself said that there was a prophet coming and we should listen to him. So this is very important to set this up because it's telling us who this Jesus person is. He says he's the light of the world. I mean, that's a massive statement, right? I mean, yes, Jesus was a prophet. Jesus is the agent of God, the messenger of God, but he's speaking here in a way that surpasses that. No prophet that I know of, did any prophet of God say, hey, I am the light of the world? No, so he's obviously greater than even all the prophets. But be that as it may, you notice here in this section that he's still very much someone who is under authority. If I testify by myself, my testimony is true, for I know where I came from. Where's he coming from? Well, he says he comes from the Father because his judgment is from the Father who sent me. You see there in verse 16? That phrase translated sent, or sent me, by the way, is from the verb apostle word in the Greek. So Jesus is an apostle and he describes himself as such every time he says, I was sent. So he's a man under authority. He's a person under authority from the Father, who we know is God. And you'll see later here that the Father is identified time and again as God. By the way, 1,300 plus times the word God in the New Testament is used for the Father. We know that sometimes the word can be used for others, like people. The judges of Israel in John chapter 10, Jesus citing Psalm 82, I believe, he says, you call gods to whom the word of God came. But overall, 1,300 plus times, the word God is the Father. And then he starts making the I am statements. I am the light. I am going. I am not judging. I'm not alone. And 18, I am he who testifies. Now, you'll notice that all these I am statements, so I am is the Greek ego eimi. I'm using the modern Greek pronunciation, by the way. You'll notice, though, grammatically speaking, that these I am statements are with a predicate, or they're qualified, in other words. So I am the light. I am going somewhere. I am not alone. I am he who testifies. They're not unqualified, which will be the case when we get to verse 58. By that, I mean that the phrase is just without qualification. It's just I am blank. You have to fill in the blank. And that's what will happen when we get to verse 58. So here it's qualified. It's with a predicate. Let's see. So let's look at the next section here, starting at verse 21, please. Let's focus once again, the ego eimi, the Greek for I am. Once again, we have a whole bunch of I am here, I am statements, and they're qualified, right? As I explained, I am going, I am from above, I am not this or that. But now, watch this. So, and it depends on what translation you're using, but we're using, for the sake of this, the NASB 95, because I want you to notice that verses 24 and 28, you see how the word he is in italics? That means the translators have added that word to make it comprehensible in our English language. The art of translation sometimes requires us to do that. If you literally translate something into English, any language, Spanish, Italian, it will probably be incomprehensible. You might get the gist of it, as they say, but in terms of grammar and the rules of English, language, it'll be a mess. So sometimes you have to paraphrase when you translate. And this is the case here. So why are the translators adding a word there, the word he, which is not found in the Greek? Because in verse 24 and 28, the phrase ego eimi is without a predicate. It's unqualified, like I explained to you. Simply reads in the Greek, I am blank. You fill in the blank. So the question is, what did Jesus mean? Well, we already saw what he meant. He said, I am who I have been telling you from the beginning. Was Jesus ever saying he was Yahweh or he was God or from the beginning? No. What about people? What were they saying about him? Well, he was a prophet, maybe Elijah, maybe someone else. And what did his closest people say about him? Who was he? In Matthew 16, Peter famously, right, answers. When Jesus asks, who do people say I am? And Peter says, you are the Messiah, the Son of God. That's who he is. It has nothing to do with the divine name, so-called. One of the other ways we know this is because this phrase, unqualified, without a predicate, ego eimi, I am, right? It appears around 11 times, about 10 times, I think, in the Gospel of John alone. 3 times it's used for other people who are not Jesus. Mark 13:6. And it's repeated in Luke 21. So this is Jesus. If you remember, this is the Olivet prophecy, the Sermon on the Mount of Olives. Many will come, he warns. This is Jesus warning. Many will come in my name saying, I am. And then you see how the NASB adds he because it's unqualified. Is Jesus saying here, many will come saying, I'm Yahweh, I'm Jehovah, I'm God? No, I am. What's the context here? The Messiah. He's warning about false messiahs, and they will mislead many. So 3 times, ego eimi is used for others in this way. And then, if we go back to the Gospel of John, later in John chapter 9, you'll see that it's used by a man who Jesus healed. The blind man, if you remember, from birth, and Jesus heals him. Jesus says, go and show them, the unbelieving Pharisees. And then verse 9 says, people were saying, this is him. No, but he is like him. And he kept saying, the blind man kept saying, I am. This statement here is unqualified. And actually, I don't know why they don't put this in italics, but that should be in italics because in the Greek, it's not qualified ego eimi without a predicate again. So what's my point here? The point is that when we go back to John 8 and you see the I am there without qualification, it'll be the same when we get to verse 58. Where Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. What you're supposed to already know is that that means he's who he said and others said about him, that he was the Messiah, the Son of God. John 4 as well, for another proof of this ego eimi without a predicate, again, unqualified. In other words, you have to fill in the blank. I am blank. I am what, right? And this is the Samaritan woman, this well-known story. The woman says, I know that Messiah is coming. Did you hear that? The woman's not expecting Yahweh in the flesh. She's not expecting the second person of a triune God. The Messiah, and by the way, just as a reminder for listeners, Messiah means the anointed one of God, from the Hebrew Mashiach, from the practice of anointing the king with oil, signifying that he's the chosen one. He's the person chosen by Yahweh, the God of Israel. And then she says, he who is called Christ. It's interesting. It gives you both forms of the title. The Mashiach word, which translates as Greek Messias, Christos, which is another translation of Messiah. So in case, right, just to make sure, when he comes or when that one comes, he will declare all things to us. And what did Jesus say? Ego eimi, unqualified, without a predicate. I, who speaks to you, am. So that's unqualified, right? And you notice there that the NASB once again adds the word he. You see there? He, because to make it understandable and clear. So let's go back to John 8. We'll finish up this chapter. Verse 56 is very important. Jesus says that Abraham saw his day. He saw it, right? And he was glad. Now, take careful note. Jesus did not say Abraham saw him, saw his person, saw Jesus. Not the day. What's that mean, the day? Well, we know from both testaments, from the Old and the New, we know that Abraham, by faith, looked forward and saw, figurative, non-literal sense, he saw the promised land, which is the kingdom. So we know this from places like Genesis. And we also know that in the New Testament, we're told the same. In Hebrews chapter 11, the faith chapter, the writer says that Abraham saw the city of God as a promise. So he believed the promise. And when it comes to the Messiah, Abraham knew about the promised seed from Genesis 12. Now, some ancient rabbis even taught that Abraham saw a vision of the whole history of his descendants, and that's in the rabbinical writings. So there is precedence for this. I think the book of Ezra, if you look up Ezra chapter 4, says that God granted Abraham a vision of the end times even. So the Jews here, in the context of chapter 8, we see how they clearly do not believe Jesus. They don't believe what he says. They don't believe what he does. They think it's from the devil, Beelzebub. They reject him while claiming to be the children of Abraham. But Jesus sternly corrects them and calls them instead sons of the devil. Jesus is making here the same point John, who wrote the Gospel of John, makes towards the end of the Gospel. So if you go to John chapter 20, you'll see the whole point of this, why this Gospel was written. I like the way the NASB puts it. And this is Jesus' point in John 8. Therefore, many other signs Jesus performed, says John, in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the second person of a Trinity, that Jesus is Yahweh in the flesh, the great I am. No. Once again, the very important title, Christ, Christos, Messiah, the anointed one of God, which means he's the Son of God. That's the point of this whole gospel. And that's the point that Jesus is trying to get through to the Pharisees or rabbis in John 8. Now, the other thing is this notion that the ego eimi is a reference to the divine name because of Exodus 3:14. We know that that's the famous burning bush vision. God reveals himself to Moses and uses the divine name, the four-letter word pronounced as Yahweh or Jehovah. It doesn't really matter. He says, I am who I am. Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Now, that's what most translations have there. I am has sent me to you. But here's the issue. So immediately people think, oh, that's ego eimi. But if we look at the Greek translation, which is, we're talking here Greek, right? Ego eimi, not Hebrew. So if you go online, and I use the a place called Kata Biblon, which is where you can find the LXX, Septuagint, you will see that actually it's not I am has sent me to you. The Greek translation in Exodus 3:14 has on. It's not ego eimi. Here you have the translation of the Greek of the divine name of the four letters with Hebrew tetragrammaton as it's known. Ego eimi on. And it translates something like I am the one who exists or the self-existing one. Then God says, go to Israel. So you have Israel there. Israel and say, on. That's not I am, folks. So it's something like tell them the self-existing one or the one who exists has sent you. Jesus obviously never said that. And no one ever said that about Jesus, that he was the self-existing one. As a matter of fact, to prove that this reference, if you want to call it that, or title, is used of the Father alone, go to Revelation 1. You have this, right? Message to the seven churches. John to the seven churches that are in Asia, grace to you, peace, from him who is, who was, who is to come. That phrase is believed to be a reference to the divine name, to the ego eimi on. Again, you can look this up. So most see this as a reference or an allusion to that divine name in the Greek, ego eimi on, of Exodus 3:14. And actually, a shortened form of it is he who is, on, which is the same reading in the Greek here. Bible Hub, you can do this. Go to the interlinear of Revelation 1:4. And this phrase, by the way, appears, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, around 5 times in Revelation, only used for the one on the throne, God the Father, never for Jesus. So you see how it translates here? We're looking at this phrase in English, who is, who was, who is to come. Let's look at the Greek, not the interlinear. On, you see that? The one who is and or the one who was, it's translated, but you can say the one who is, the one who was, the one that is erchomenos, coming. And there's the on, the very same one that we find in Exodus 3:14 in the Greek. it appears that John is using a reference to the divine name for God the Father in the New Testament only, even though it's not, verbatim the same thing, but it's nonetheless, but it's definitely a reference. So God commands Moses to identify, once again, going back to the burning bush, God commands Moses to identify himself, God, Yahweh, as the On. It's not ego in me, folks. Here's the last thing I'll say about this phrase. Look at this bias, right? So again, using the Bible Hub, go to John 8:58. Now, I'm going back to the ego in me, the I am statement without a predicate, right? Unqualified, if you remember. Watch what happens here. Most, if not all translations at John 8:58, they leave it unqualified without a predicate in their translations. John 8:58. In other words, before Abraham was born, came to exist or whatever, I am. So they don't qualify it in the translation. They don't add, remember, they typically add the word he. They even sometimes add, it is I, the Messiah. But they only here, do most, if not all translations, leave it as is. In other words, to me, that looks like a translator's bias. And sometimes look at what the New King James does. It even capitalizes, all caps, I am. Guess why they do that? Because they think it is the divine name. But everywhere else for qualified, they add the word he or I, the Messiah, except here. Now, to me, that is clear bias. That is clear. I'm trying to be nice about it, but they're trying to control the reader, right? To understand things the way that these translators, who for the most part are Trinitarian committees, scholars, from a Trinitarian slant. For more, go to one of our websites, thehumanjesus.org. You see there, just enter ego in me or I am, and you should be able to see a few articles. So pretty much what I've told you here. This is an article by a sister called Elaine, very good article you can look at. This is the one from Anthony. He does the same here, goes through all the verses in context. Any other texts, I call it traditional Trinity text. I created this list for anyone interested. The let us verses starting in Genesis 1:26, Genesis 18:19, and you have links there and other stuff. So text from the Old to the New Testament. Do I have John 8? Yep, and you can see John 8. You got videos. I did a pre-existing panel. And there's also an interview from an ex-Jehovah's Witness elder